The United States is currently issuing a warning to the world. The US has warned that as early as this fall, Russia may attempt an attack on NATO. Considering that the US has issued warnings right before various wars broke out in the past, and those wars actually happened, this is a rather chilling warning. Currently, in the war in Ukraine, Russia has not been able to turn the tide. On the contrary, Russia has even allowed some of Ukraine's counterattacks. As a result, there are reports that President Putin of Russia, in order to reverse this situation, may attempt a limited attack on NATO as early as this fall or within the next few years to test NATO's resolve. We need to be precise here. Testing NATO's resolve means testing NATO's collective defense system. If even one of the 32 NATO member countries is attacked by an enemy, it is considered an attack on all of NATO, and all NATO member countries must respond with force. But the idea is to intentionally break this system by testing it. This information comes from US intelligence agencies. In particular, it said that Russia could test NATO's willingness to respond through limited attacks. The scenarios presented by US intelligence agencies are quite diverse. At the lowest level, cyber attacks are being discussed. At a higher level, territorial incursions using drones have also been mentioned. Russia could send drones into the airspace or territory of NATO member countries, and then target military facilities, or the visit involve conducting reconnaissance or carrying out limited attacks around military facilities or key infrastructure. This is already happening continuously in places like Romania. However, US intelligence agencies are presenting even more dangerous scenarios beyond just cyber attacks or drone incursions. They have also mentioned methods similar to those used during Russia's occupation of Crimea in 2014. At that time, the Russian military deployed troops without clear identification on their uniforms, and the Russian government also did not officially acknowledge their identity in the early stages. It is known that US intelligence officials are considering the possibility that Russia might use similar methods against NATO member countries. This involves the Russian military deploying armed forces to border areas while concealing their affiliation or nationality, taking control of administrative agencies or military facilities in certain regions, and then denying any direct connection to Russia. If this happens, NATO will have to make a very complicated decision, because even if armed forces are actually occupying territory in the country, it may be difficult to immediately determine whether they are regular Russian troops, pro-Russian armed groups, or irregular organizations supported by Russia. If Russia denies the attack itself and buys time, there is a possibility that they will further strengthen their control over the area. Therefore, what the US government and intelligence agencies are concerned about is not only large-scale troop deployments, but also limited military actions whose perpetrators and intentions are difficult to clearly define. But ever since this analysis from the US government intelligence agencies came out, Russia has been provoking Europe more frequently. Even if you check the map right now, in the past year, the countries Russia has provoked in Europe include Estonia, Latvia, Romania, Serbia, Germany, Sweden, and Poland. That's quite a lot. Compared to before, Russia continues to carry out provocations. Let me explain step by step. First, in the case of Germany, there was an attempted assassination targeting an executive of a German startup defense company, but it failed. And there was also an incident where Russia sent a suicide drone to the security area near a Ukrainian cargo plane at Leipzig-Halle Airport in eastern Germany. According to a report released last month by the International Institute for Strategic Studies in the UK, at least 144 suspicious drone sightings were reported in 13 countries between August 2025 and February 2026. Also in Sweden, an agent belonging to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service was arrested. This agent tried to infiltrate the Swedish government to collect information on activities against Russia and take countermeasures, but was caught and arrested. And in Swedish society, they tried to create division and make the people fight among themselves. Also, in Poland, during Russia's attack on Ukraine, numerous drones entered Polish airspace, and the Polish Air Force and NATO allies shot down some of these aircraft. And in eastern Poland, tensions rose when a Russian missile appeared. It fell on farmland, so there were no casualties. And in the case of Romania, Russia keeps sending in drones whenever it gets the chance. They've already sent drones into Romania 33 times. In fact, in May, a Russian military drone attacked an apartment in the eastern Galati region of Romania, injuring 2 people. There have been as many as 50 cases of drones or debris being found on Romanian territory. As you can see, Russia has recently been carrying out various forms of provocations against NATO member countries. But in this situation, the response shown by NATO countries has remained quite defensive. Most of the time, they only tracked or intercepted drones that entered their airspace and investigated missiles or suspicious objects that fell on their territory. There have been no direct military attacks against Russia or retaliatory operations targeting Russian territory. Diplomatically, their response was also limited to strongly criticizing Russia and expressing the intention to hold them accountable. From NATO's perspective, there are reasons why they have no choice but to respond this way. If they respond militarily right away to Russia's attacks, it could create a situation where NATO and Russia directly clash, separate from the war in Ukraine. Especially the moment NATO directly attacks Russian territory, Russia could also use that as justification for further military action. This is why NATO has so far tried to avoid escalation as much as possible, and has maintained a defensive response. But the problem is that Russia continues its provocations even after seeing these responses. At first it was just airspace violations, but later there were actual cases of missiles or drones falling on NATO territory. There have also been incidents where civilians have been injured. From the perspective of NATO member countries, even though their own territory and citizens are being directly harmed, they keep limiting the level of their response to avoid a full-scale conflict with Russia. This situation keeps repeating itself. There are concerns that if this situation continues, Russia will be able to figure out NATO's response thresholds. That's because Russia can find out to what extent they have to attack for NATO to respond militarily, and in which cases NATO only makes diplomatic protests. If Russia is actually testing NATO's willingness to respond in this way, it's hard to rule out the possibility that the intensity of provocations will gradually increase. This is why there are concerns that as NATO countries keep focusing on defense and avoiding direct responses every time they're attacked, Russia might consider higher levels of military action against certain member states. So the key question is where Russia might actually try to carry out such attacks. According to several foreign media reports, there are 4 main countries that are commonly mentioned: the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and Poland. All 4 of these countries are located in areas that are directly connected to Russia's Western military strategy, and their geographic conditions mean they are inevitably affected by the military movements of Russia and Belarus. In particular, between Poland and the 3 Baltic states lie Kaliningrad, a Russian exclave, and Belarus, making this a region that European military experts have long paid attention to. The area most frequently mentioned in Poland is the Suwałki Gap. The Suwałki Gap is a narrow land corridor between Poland and Lithuania, located between Russia's Kaliningrad to the west and Belarus, Russia's ally, to the east. The reason this area is important is because it serves as a land corridor connecting the 3 Baltic states with other NATO member countries. If Russian and Belarusian forces try to pressure or seize this area at the same time, NATO's land supply routes to the 3 Baltic states could be severely restricted. That's why the Suwałki corridor is considered one of the areas in Europe where tensions could rise first in the event of a military conflict. However, actually choosing Poland as a target for attack could be a significant burden for Russia as well. In recent years, Poland has been rapidly strengthening its army, artillery, air defense, and armored forces through large-scale military expansion. From Russia's perspective, Poland has become a country with much stronger military power compared to the past, so even if they attempt a limited attack, they would have to endure a significant military response. Therefore, if Russia tries to test NATO's willingness to respond, there is a possibility that it may choose the Baltic states, where the military burden is relatively lower. The situation of the Baltic states is quite different from that of Poland, Estonia, and Latvia. Even if you combine the forces of all 3 countries, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, it is known to be only about 34,000 to 45,000 troops. Because the countries themselves are small, there are limits to maintaining a large standing army, and compared to Russia, their ability to independently conduct a large-scale war for an extended period is also limited. In particular, all 3 countries are unable to independently operate a large-scale air force, and their heavy equipment capabilities, such as tanks, are also limited. Therefore, it is assessed that it would be difficult to withstand a large-scale Russian attack for an extended period with only their own forces in the event of an emergency. The most concerning issue here is time. While NATO has the military capability to support its member countries, the actual arrival of troops on the ground is a different matter. If an attack occurs, each country must assess the situation and determine the level of military response, and there is also a process required to move the necessary troops and equipment. In countries with small territories like the Baltic states, this time can be even more critical. If Russian forces quickly seize certain areas in the early stages and take control of major transportation networks or military facilities, there is concern that they could secure a significant amount of territory before NATO reinforcement troops arrive. That's why one scenario being raised is if Russia carries out a very rapid military action against one of the Baltic states. Instead of deploying large numbers of troops for a long period, the Russian military would quickly move troops near the border, seize key facilities and transportation networks, and undermine the local government's ability to respond. If that happens, by the time NATO decides to provide military support, the local military situation could have already changed significantly. What Russia might aim for is not just occupying all of the Baltic states for a long time, but also securing as much territory as possible before NATO can fully respond, creating a new situation.